Chapter 23. All three vampires had their backs to me, for now at least. One of them was speaking in a low voice. I realised he was talking to Dimmy and April. I froze on the spot, not daring to make a noise. After a few moments, I slowly moved a couple of paces until I was tucked in the very corner of the deck, as far as I could get from the blue lights that hung above. I shrank down low against the railing, trying to become invisible. I hardly let myself breathe as I watched them. The vampires wore fine suits made from what looked like black, velvety material. All three were men, one of them tall and gangly, one broad and muscular, and the third was somewhere in between, and had hair down to his shoulders. The broad one clearly had to have his suit specially made. His arms and legs were so enormous they would burst out of normal clothes. "Here for the feast?" I heard the long-haired vampire say to the others in a posh English accent. "How would a witch and a kid vampire know about the feast?" I couldn't see April and Dimmy's faces. They were hidden behind the vampires. "We'll see what the Queen thinks," the tallest vampire said, and he guided them to a set of stairs further along the deck. It was too high for me to see what the stairs led to. My breath hitched. They were going to see the Vampire Queen. This wasn't part of the plan. I was about to rush after them when I heard Dimmy say loudly, There's a rumour that you have a vampire hunter on board." The tallest vampire turned around. Finally, I saw his face. He had a long, pointed nose and an even pointier chin. "That's right," he said suspiciously, his weaselly voice going high-pitched. He stepped closer and leaned down so he was face to face with Dimmy. "Wow," April said. "It's impressive that you managed to capture a hunter." The man stood up straight and brushed at his jacket. "The Queen is very powerful." "She must be," April said. "But how is she keeping such a powerful enemy locked up?" The man laughed. "Hunters aren't as strong as they pretend. The foolish human is on the level below us, caged like an animal." "Mum!" The other vampires laughed along with him, then shoved April and Dimmy up the stairs to the platform above. My mind raced. What should I do? If I rescued April and Dimmy now, I might never be able to save Mum. But if I went to the lower level to find her, I was leaving them to face the Queen, alone. What would April want me to do? I thought. It didn't take me long to come up with an answer. There was no way April would put my mum at risk. She'd climbed onto the ship without having a proper plan. She'd been willing to put herself in danger. It took all my willpower to turn my back on her. "Please stay alive until I return," my mind shouted into the darkness. When the vampires were out of sight, I hurried along the deck and quickly descended the steps to the level below. I tried to keep myself from thinking about what was happening above. What if the Queen doesn't believe them? What if... I shook the thoughts away. I had to focus. Soon my eyes had adjusted to the darkness. Light came from a swimming pool in the centre of the room, which was lit from underneath. It cast pale, rippling shadows across the walls. In a metal cage that hung from the ceiling over the pool was my mother, one leg hanging through the bars. My heart leapt, and I had to stop myself running to her. Glancing around for any sign of vampires, I crept closer. That's when I saw who was lying beside her, unconscious. Bane Larkin. She was trapped with him. If he really was a vampire, he'd feed on her when he woke up, maybe even kill her. Without warning, a door opened at the other end of the room. A vampire dressed in black fur walked in. I pressed myself against the wall, praying he wouldn't see me. The vampire wore a hat with a single white feather, and his polished shoes clicked on the decking. "Hello, dear," he said. For a moment I thought he was talking to me, but he turned to look at the cage. "It's time to get you ready. The Queen doesn't want to wait until midnight after all." He had a faint accent, but I couldn't figure out what it was. He reached forward with his cane. The end of it hovered above the latch at the top of the cage, but he didn't undo it. "You have a daughter, is that right?" he asked. I couldn't see his face, but I had a feeling he was smiling. "Yes," she replied. "Vampires have an amazing sense of smell," he said. "Did you know that?" Mum nodded. He reached forward as if he was going to undo the latch, but again he stopped at the last moment. "It's strange," he said. "When people are related, they have a very similar scent. Have you ever noticed that?" "What are you asking these questions for?" Mum spat. "Just let me out of here so I can kill you." "So confident," the vampire said, "and so strong, but I'm going to break you." This time it was Mum who laughed. "You could try." "Do you like my ship, Hunter?" he asked. "Is it what you expected?" "I'm done answering your questions," Mum snapped. "Oh, but I wasn't talking to you, my dear," he said menacingly. "I was talking to the other hunter in the room." His head spun in my direction. His face was truly horrifying. He was so thin he could have been a skeleton. My blood turned cold. "Hello, little hunter," he purred. "I could smell you the moment I walked in." In a heartbeat, he was at my side. He'd moved so fast it was as if he'd teleported. I reached for the stake in my pocket, but it wasn't there. Panic rushed through me. "Looking for this?" he asked. In his gloved hand, he held the stake. Lazily, he threw it over his shoulder and then grabbed my arm in a vice-like grip and dragged me over to the pool. Mum crawled to the front of the cage when she saw me. "No!" she yelled. She shook the cage bars, trying to break free. "Oh dear," the vampire said, holding my arm so tightly I had to stop myself screaming. "It must be awful to have to watch your daughter get hurt." He turned to smile wickedly at me. "My name is Skull," he said. "I would ask your name, but you won't be alive much longer, so there isn't much point." He pushed me a few steps away and then turned and bowed. I clenched my fists, trying to ignore the fact that my whole body was shaking in fear. Thinking of April upstairs with the vampire queen, I forced myself to bow and took the fighting stance Mum had taught me. I stared at Skull and tried to pretend I wasn't frightened. This is it, I thought. I have to win. If I don't, the people I love will die. Chapter 24. Mum was watching closely. I could feel her eyes on me. I had to win. Skull was on me before I could react. Pain erupted in my shoulder, and the world fell away as I flew sideways. I hit the wall with a thud and slid to the ground. My body sang with pain. I crawled to my feet. He was there again. I ducked his attack and rolled out of the way. When I stood up, Skull loomed over me yet again. He punched me in the chest. Something inside me cracked and my stomach flipped as I flew backwards. I crashed into the wall, seeming to hang there for a moment before dropping to the floor. I couldn't breathe. I was vaguely aware of my mum screaming and the bars of the cage rattling. I dragged myself off the floor, my limbs heavy and aching, but I couldn't keep upright. I stumbled and crashed onto my back. Lying there, I desperately tried to move. Skull walked towards me. He had my stake in his hand. "Over so quickly," he said. "I'm quite disappointed." No, I thought. This can't be it. They were all relying on me. I couldn't fail. Skull smirked as he leaned over me. I could smell his breath, metallic and bloody. "Goodbye," he murmured. He raised the stake above his head, but before he could strike, a noise on the stairs distracted him. It was the tall vampire with the pointed chin and nose. He was dragging someone down the stairs by their hair, their golden hair. He had a huge bunch of it in his fist. April. She was struggling, trying to fight him off, but she was no match for a vampire. He tugged her viciously down the last few steps and then held her head up for Skull to see. Her eyes were wide with terror. "I have a fake witch for you," the tall vampire said. "She can't seem to do a scrap of magic." "Kill her," Skull said. The tall vampire grew a pair of glistening fangs and lowered his head towards April's neck. "No!" I screamed. I leapt off the ground, lunged at the tall vampire and crashed into him. He hit the stairs hard and his head lolled to one side. He was unconscious. Panting, I scrambled up and reached for April, but Skull got there first. He shoved me aside. I hit the wall and doubled over, unable to breathe. Through tears of pain, I watched him lean towards April. She shuddered under his gaze. "I know," Skull announced. "I'll kill this lovely blonde one first and make you watch. Then I'll kill you." "No!" my mind screamed. I wanted to yell it. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't catch my breath and my limbs wouldn't move. Skull towered over April like a spectre. She crawled away, whimpering, but he followed her. He whipped her around to face him and then raised the stake in both hands. Without mercy, he stabbed her in the chest. Yellow light flashed like a firework. A swirling disc of light sizzled around April's chest. It came from the necklace. Her eyes flamed. A bolt of golden energy shot towards Skull. He flew backwards and landed with an enormous splash in the pool. His body bobbed up and down on the surface. He didn't move. He stayed there, floating face down. April gasped and clutched her chest. I blinked several times. Had that really just happened? Shaking myself, I stumbled over to April. She trembled. "I guess I really am a witch," she said breathlessly. "Are you okay?" I asked, checking her chest for injury. "I'm fine," she said. "He didn't hurt me. The necklace stopped him somehow." "Your Gran was right. She said it was a protection charm." Her eyes kept trying to close as if she couldn't stay awake. "You have to help Dimmy," she said. "He's in danger. The Lacuna gem blocks magic. The Queen's going to use it." Her voice trailed off as if it was too painful to speak. "April," I said again. "Was she hurt? What was wrong with her?" "I'm fine," she said, "but the necklace sapped my energy. Help Dimmy. Queen has the gem. Blocks magic." Her eyes drifted closed and her head fell to one side. I lowered her gently to the floor, tugged off the unconscious vampire's coat and laid it over her. Hating to leave April, I hurried to the pool. Above Skull's floating body, Mum pointed through the bars of the cage. "The cane!" she said. I picked it up. The silver handle was cold. Standing on tiptoe, I lifted it towards the top of the cage. I used the tip of the cane to slide the latch across. It clicked and the cage door fell open, landing against the side of the pool to create a ramp. Mum lowered herself down and pulled the unconscious Bane behind her. His skin was white, his lips blue. He looked half dead. Mum bent down and placed her hand on his forehead. "He's dying. We need to get him to a hospital." "What did they do to him?" I asked. "The Queen kept him for his blood. They took some every night to feed on." "They took his blood? But vampires can't drink the blood of another vampire. That meant—" "He's human," I muttered under my breath. Bile crawled up my throat at the sight of him. He was leeched of all colour, thanks to the blood that had been sucked out of him night after night. Yet, as I peered closer, I saw there wasn't a mark on his body. His neck wasn't scarred. Then my inside squirmed when I saw the cannulas taped to his wrists. They must have clipped them to blood bags and drained the blood straight out of his veins. How much did they take? Mum shook her head in disgust. Once she'd checked him over, she straightened up, her expression severe. "What were you thinking?" she asked. "You could have got yourself killed coming here. And you brought April." "I was trying to save you," I replied, tightening my hold on the cane. "I thought you'd be pleased." "Pleased?" she said. "The only thing I'm pleased about is that the Queen didn't get her way." "What do you mean?" "When she realised Rafe had brought her the wrong boy, I thought she was going to burst a blood vessel." "Wrong boy?" I asked, a horrible feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. "She didn't want Bane?" "Of course not." "But if she didn't want him, then who did she want?" "Vladimir Knox," Mum replied. "It turns out he's real." My blood turned cold. I stared at her in horror. Seeing the look on my face, she crossed her arms. "What is it?" she asked. "Henrietta, what have you done?" "Dimmy," I thought, panic-stricken. "The Queen wants Dimmy."